Speaking of cuckoo, we're talking about doing taxes and giving money to the government. We're talking about that, but we're also going to be talking about not laundering money. This is just like all kinds of fun. Pay your taxes, don't launder money. But without any further ado, ready? Got the check, mic check, 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 1, 2. Everybody give it up to Joe.
I'm so excited to follow the tax guy as a compliance professional. It's a little bit of less pressure now, so we'll see where this goes. I know we have people from different areas of crypto space, different levels of interest, different practices in the space, so I'm going to try to keep things pretty general here, and then we can drill down maybe during Q&A. So what I want to focus on are what are the key regulations, and sort of the federal level, work down to the state, and then talk about some pressing things that are happening here in California, whether we know it or not, relevant to regulation. And Jody and a few others had mentioned maybe there's some advocacy positions that we could take individually or as a collective. And so maybe we'll throw those out at the end and see what you guys want to talk about. So we'll talk at the federal level. So there's this rumor going around that Bitcoin is sort of the Wild West and is unregulated. Nothing could be further from the truth. To many people, maybe it's overregulated, but there's some alphabet soup agencies that regulate Bitcoin. So I'm going to cover just a few of those here today, get you some of the heavy hitters. So, whoops. Sort of an alphabet soup here. Hopefully everybody can see. We talked about the IRS earlier today, so we won't talk. Yeah, thank you, sir. We won't talk too much about the tax side of things because we had an excellent speaker earlier today on that subject. I want to focus a lot of attention on FinCEN, a little less on the SEC and CFTC. So real quick, talk about the SEC and the CFTC. So the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, has said under certain circumstances, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can be considered a security, right? So the SEC has been very busy in the space. They've been focusing most notably on ICOs. Everybody here know what an ICO is? Have an idea? Initial coin. For those that don't, it's an initial coin offering. Sort of a spin on the term IPO, right? So it's sort of a way that individuals could invest in something, right? So sort of crowd investing in something, but get a token as a representation of that value. So the SEC said, well, that's a security, and they began investigating a bunch of people, finding a bunch of people, creating some case law, and ultimately, in my opinion, effectively shut down the ICO space by virtue of their enforcement actions. So depending upon one's perspective, they did a fantastic job, or they cut off some new mechanism of financing. So in certain circumstances, again, cryptocurrency could be considered a security. Very quiet space right now in terms of that. The CFTC has said in certain circumstances, oh, by the way, Commodities Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC has said in certain circumstances, cryptocurrency could be considered a commodity. So that's a very interesting space as well. I don't think we have too many folks here in the commodity space, but that has really been relegated to sort of traditional players getting involved in crypto. Chairman Giancarlo of the CFTC is affectionately known as Crypto Daddy. Has anybody heard of Crypto Daddy? Yeah, so you got some people some diehard folks here. So Chairman Giancarlo was known as Crypto Daddy because during some presentation alongside the SEC, gave a presentation in which he talked about how we owe it to the younger generation to be more inclined to accept innovation and to tread lightly in terms of innovation. And he talked affectionately about his young kids and how they are very interested in the crypto space and they think stocks and bonds and everything else is boring, but they're really excited about crypto. So that kind of raised his profile. There's t-shirts and stuff. He has like sunglasses and they made him look all cool and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty interesting, and it sort of points to the CFTC at least being a little bit more open-minded currently. The SEC sort of gets a cold reception everywhere they go, unfortunately for them. But they recently launched something called the FinHub. And so FinHub is their regulatory sandbox. Does everybody here know what a regulatory sandbox is? Okay, so I mean, it's sort of wonky compliance stuff. What's this compliance guy saying? What's a sandbox? So a sandbox is an environment that companies can play in and start a business, and they can do things without going through the formal licensing process. They're allowed to play in that sandbox, provided they play by some certain rules. the licensing and registration tend to take a sideline, but ultimately that's the exit, right? So they want people to be able to tinker and bring their business questions, their compliance questions directly to the regulators in a very safe environment, right? At least that's the gist of it. We've seen a lot of successful ones outside of the US, such as with the Central Bank of Bahrain, which our company works with, which is pretty cool. They have one established. FinHub at the SEC, I think they're still putting sand into the sandbox. I really don't think there's a sandbox there yet, but I'm hopeful long term that maybe that's something they can put into play. Because ultimately, the idea is to get people comfortable doing something and then build them up towards an exit, and the exit is ideally something with a license or a registration where they can actually be treated as they would anyone else that has that license, has that capability. So the sandbox is pretty interesting. Anyway, they call it the FinHub. But we're going to focus most of our attention on FinCEN. Everybody here heard of FinCEN? Yeah, some people grumbling. Okay, great. I'll take that as a yes. So FinCEN initially came up with what we think is the first formal regulatory guidance in cryptocurrency back in 2013, which I'm told makes people really old in Bitcoin years if you did something in 2013. So in 2013, FinCEN came out with their initial guidance, and they said, if you're doing any activity in which there is an exchange of fiat to crypto, crypto to fiat, or crypto to crypto, you are an exchanger. That's their word they came up with. An exchanger, ER, and therefore you are a money transmitter. Right, so a money transmitter is a type of MSB. Everybody here heard of an MSB? That's sort of bandied about a lot in the crypto space. MSB stands for a money services business, of which a money transmitter is a type of MSB. So a lot of people confuse that. They say, oh, I'm an MSB. Well, yes, you are, but in particular, you're a money transmitter, right? There's other types of MSBs like check casher, foreign currency. The reason it's very important, among other things, to have this distinction is for a money transmitter, there's no threshold cutoff. So you can cash checks for other people up to $1,000, and you're not registered as a money transmitter, or as a MSB. But for a money transmitter, it doesn't matter if you do a nickel, a penny, you're a money transmitter. There's no threshold. So early on in the space, people thought, well, I do under $1,000, I'm not a money transmitter. No, you are a money transmitter. There's no threshold for transactions. Personally, I think that's by design, by FinCEN, right? So there's no way that you can sort of go under that threshold, like a check casher, for example. So in their initial guidance, they called that activity, they called those individuals or companies exchangers. They also had two other distinctions. Straight here. They had an administrator and a merchant. These are two other terms that they defined in that initial guidance. An administrator essentially is someone who puts a currency into circulation and has the ability to accept redemptions on that currency. Bitcoin is not an administrator. Does everybody know why?
Because you can't redeem it.
Can't redeem it. There's no Bitcoin company, there's no Bitcoin czar, there's no board of directors, there's nothing that you can cash that in. Now that we know there's exchanges, right? We can go to Coinbase or Kraken, you can sell and buy Bitcoin. But that currency itself has no administrator. It cannot be administrator by definition. Now, if we came up with Joe Coin and I put that out into circulation and said, hey, I have some coin, I'm going to sell it. I'll take it back if you guys want to sell it. FinCEN says, well, you're an administrator. But Bitcoin is a code that was released into the wild. No one controls it, right? It's not an administrator. It's very important. Third term that they came up with, pretty intuitive, is a merchant, right? That's anyone that accepts Bitcoin or cryptocurrency as payment. Pretty straightforward. FinCEN says you're not a money transmitter, to state the obvious, right? So if you accept Bitcoin as payment for services rendered, you are merely a merchant. Clearly there's a tax implication, as we talked about earlier, and obviously other laws apply, but as far as FinCEN's concerned, you are not a money transmitter, right? So exchanger is really key. So what does all this mean, Joe? I'm a money transmitter, that's great. I own a Bitcoin ATM, or I do trading on local Bitcoins. I do something that qualifies for this category. What does that mean I have to do? Well, that means you have to do, among other things, at a high level, three things. You need to register with FinCEN. You need an AML program, which is a service our company offers. And you need a state license. So we'll take each of those real quick here. Registration with FinCEN, I promise you it's one of the easiest things you'll ever do. one of the easiest encounters you'll ever have with the federal government. Registering with FinCEN is a check-the-box activity. You literally go onto their website and you declare yourself to be a money transmitter, right? You go on there, you fill out Form 107, it's a legacy form, but that's the name of it, Form 107 or RMSB, and you register as an eBSA filer. 2 parts to that. You register. I've been told it takes anywhere from 25 to 45 minutes to register with FinCEN. Super easy, and it is free. Your tax dollars at work, folks. It's free. Fantastic. Now, if you conduct money transmitter activity and you are unregistered, FinCEN has told us this is their #1 priority, is to identify people that are conducting unregistered money transmitter activities. If you are unregistered and you are conducting MSB activities, you could face up to 5 years in prison.
Just for taking grandma's money and converting it to Bitcoin, that's terrible.
Yes, yes, okay. So we could agree that 5 years is a little draconian. However, I will say the government in their infinite wisdom at least somewhat disagrees by that. And what I mean by that is they essentially use that as sort of leverage to get you to either plead guilty or somehow go forward with a process and say, you know what, I should have registered, it's my bad, work it out through the courts. We haven't seen them press anybody for 5 years in prison, at least not without some other circumstance, like maybe they were doing business with some nefarious characters or some other activity. Generally speaking, we think that that's used much for leverage, right, to see if they can get something out of it. So registration for FinCEN, 30 minutes online or 5 years in prison, take your pick. When you register with FinCEN, and this is very important, when you click submit, you are agreeing to, among other things, have a written AML compliance program in place. We'll talk about that in a second. And you agree to obtain a state license in every state in which you do business or have operations. Really big deal. So we'll take those individually. By the way, when you register with FinCEN, you are also agreeing that you could be examined at any point in time by FinCEN. But FinCEN doesn't conduct the examinations. I'm really going to confuse you. They deputize the IRS, not the tax side, but they deputize the IRS from Homeland Security to conduct examinations. So they can come in at any time. And in fact, Kenneth Blanco, the director of FinCEN, actually went down on a business trip to the Bay Area, and he dropped in on a bunch of exchanges unannounced. He can do that. He can walk right in. He's with FinCEN. He can walk in at any time, and he did. Now, he was complimentary, and he said, we appreciate you filing suspicious activity reports, and thanks for the engagement. He met with some executives, a lot of handshaking, politicking, that sort of thing. Great, that's fantastic. But it just goes to show that they can drop in at any time for any reason. So you're agreeing to be examined at any point in any time. You agree to have a written AML or anti-money laundering compliance program in place. Again, that's something that we offer to our clients. What an AML program is, think of it as your written compliance game plan, right? This is how you are going to help thwart money laundering, help the government in their fight against money laundering. What controls do you have in place? Record keeping, reporting, how do you respond to subpoenas, requests from law enforcement, what tiers do you have, right? So if you guys have been to a Bitcoin ATM machine, there's usually tiers for information that you provide at the time of transaction. All that is recorded as part of the policy in an AML program for Bitcoin ATMs, for exchanges you may have been on. If you purchase from CoinDesk, you're like, hey, Coinbase, hey, I'm purchasing this amount. Why are they asking for this information and they're asking for this over here? That's part of their stated AML program, part of their KYC process within that AML program. So you have to register with FinCEN, subject yourself to examinations at any point in time, written AML compliance program, and finally, state licensure. So this one is pretty interesting. Every state, with the exception of Montana, has a state money transmitter license requirement for, has a state license requirement for money transmission. Every state except Montana. But what's interesting in the world of crypto is most states, by my last count, most states have a so-called no action or no opinion stance, meaning they have not decided, at least not formally, how crypto and Bitcoin and other coins intersect with their traditional money transmission rules, right? So it's unknown. In fact, if you start a business, you have to actually call the state and say, am I a money transmitter? Do I have to have a state license? And again, most states, mathematically, most states will say no, if your business model is a direct wallet to wallet. That's the key differentiator for most of the no action states. in most of the pro-Bitcoin states, right? So we divided into sort of 2 or 3 categories. So we have pro, no, and anti, right? So this is the slide we use when we talk to law enforcement and bankers, right? So the state level licensing, pro-Bitcoin, no action, and anti-Bitcoin. Pro-Bitcoin and anti-Bitcoin, in air quotes, what they have in common is they actually have something from regulators that you can print out. The regulators have decided something, it's on letterhead, they've made a decision, anyone can download it, anyone can read it. The difference between pro and anti, I guess, is kind of intuitive from our standpoint. Pro means it's something positive for the crypto space. Anti, well, that's BitLicense and that side of the ledger. So pro-Bitcoin states, Illinois, Texas, Tennessee, Kansas, those states have said in regulatory guidance, if you do a direct wallet-to-wallet transaction, again, we're generalizing here, we can't go with everybody's business model, but generally speaking, direct wallet-to-wallet transaction, you're not a money transmitter and you don't need a state license, which is awesome. So the reason you see so many Bitcoin ATMs in Chicago is because the state of Illinois has said early on, by the way, with their guidance, not state money transmitter license, don't need it. Same with Texas, right? Texas is a huge Bitcoin state. Gee, I wonder why, right? Big population state, pro-business and pro-Bitcoin. On the other side, the anti-side, you have New York with a bit license. You have Hawaii, which requires you to hold the same amount of currency as you do in crypto. So your crypto and your currency have to be equal. So Coinbase actually said, too rich for our blood, we're out of here. So when my clients asked me about Hawaii, I said, well, if Coinbase can't make it there, what makes you think you can? And I don't mean to be blunt, but that's the harsh reality of it. It's very difficult with that unrealistic expectation. And to a certain extent, I might put Washington State in here, in anti, only because they actually require you to go through the formal process of money transmitter license, just like a traditional money transmitter. But ironically enough, we actually find a lot of our clients and a lot of folks in the space, they actually like that clarity. They're like, oh, I have to get a license just like everybody else. Well, I'll go through the process. And the state of Washington is actually piloting a program, excuse me, where 6 states will have reciprocity. I heard they're working on 12, but right now it's 6. So if you get a state license with them, it's possible to get it in 6 other states. So there are some exchanges, smaller exchanges, that are starting off in the state of Washington, and people are like, the state of Washington, why? There you go. Why apply in 6 different states if you can apply in 1 and potentially get 6 on top of that? You have nothing to lose. Why wouldn't you follow that approach? But anyway, I guess we will put them in anti-category for now, although I think they're onto something there. The no action states, what that means is they don't have anything, or they have next to nothing in writing, right? They don't have anything out there that says, hey, here's our guidance, here's what we think. You actually have to call them up. And again, more often than not, if you do call them up and you're doing direct wallet to wallet, they say no action. We're not gonna take any action right now if it's a direct wallet to wallet sale. So we've got registration with FinCEN, AML program, state licensing. One other thing I want to get to before we'll talk a little bit about state licensing. No action states, right? So, sorry about that. So in a no action state, you actually have to call them up and get them to tell you if you are a money transmitter. So it's pretty interesting. It's kind of on that company or that entity to call up, and more often than not, again, direct wallet to wallet, it's good news. California is still in that position. So the DBO, Department of Business Oversight, is in charge of money transmitter license in the state of California. They have been very silent about money transmission licenses in California. So much so that their last point of contact, at least in transcript, was in 2015, when they went out of their way to correct an erroneous report in the media that said Coinbase had a license with them. They said that in fact that is not true. We have not issued a Coinbase license to Coinbase. We've actually not issued a money transmitter license to anyone in California. We're still working on it. We're still considering it. And to this day, that's their last point of regulatory contact. There have been several bills proposed about regulating Bitcoin here in California for state money transmission license. I won't go through all of them, but the one that's been introduced very recently, at the end of February, as a matter of fact, you might want to jot this down, is AB 1489. AB 1489. Definitely commit that to memory. Look it up, read into it. I I'm on public record as saying it's basically BitLicense Lite. It is very comprehensive. I would argue over the top in terms of licensing. The requirements are very in-depth. Not only is it everything that FinCEN expects, like an AML program, right? Record keeping and reporting, but it also requires things like information security policy, fraud prevention, data continuity. There's also net worth requirements, right? So we're deliberately taking advantage of people that don't have as much money as rich people. And there are other requirements, surety bonds, really a lot of barriers to entry to actually get that license. And it would be encapsulated in 1489. 1489 is based off of the Uniform Law Commission, ULC. So the ULC, Uniform Law Commission, is a bunch of lawyers that get together from all the different states. I think there's 400 of them. From all the different states, they get together and they decide, hey, we're going to put together a recommendation for what state licensing should be. Now, this group is non-binding, but they have a degree of influence, and I would argue they give a degree of cover fire for things like AB 1489. So anyway, 1489, the Uniform Law Commission, again, a group of lawyers get together from all the different states, and they're trying to have some sort of uniform regulation for state money transmission of crypto. Unfortunately, they picked one that I vehemently disagree with. The big problem with this is it doesn't have the exceptions that I think it should have. So it does have exceptions for academic research, which I think we can all think that's pretty cool, right? So professors and college courses, they can study this and talk about it, and they don't have to worry about getting a license. All right, that's cool. They have a cap. So if you do trading activity below $5,000, which is kind of minimal in the crypto space, right? Especially when we're talking about the low margins that some activity would produce. But if it's under $5,000 annually, you don't have to get a license. So that's really not much of an exception. And then there's a few others that really dovetail with FinCEN's exception. So there's really not much of a, of a gift there in terms of the industry. What's missing from this, and what I like about the pro and no action states, is there's no exception for direct wallet to wallet. In other words, if you do any exchange activity, you would meet this definition. Any exchange or activity. So all the Bitcoin ATMs that you see right now in the state of California, none of them have a money transmitter license. Not because they're cool and they want to buck the system, but because the state won't issue one. All of those would have to then apply for AB 1489. And if you want to challenge the state, the fines range daily from $10,000 to $50,000 per day for a fine for not being registered as money transmission. I don't know how on earth the Department of Business Oversight, which I would argue is probably already overworked, already has plenty of assignments because they're like a super agency. Not only are they dealing with money transmission, they're dealing with other licenses and business oversight and environmental stuff. So they're going to go on local Bitcoins and they're going to catch a bunch of people selling crypto and then fine them $10,000 to $50,000 a day. So this is utterly impractical. So our firm, and me in particular, we've been writing some articles saying, hey, look, we totally get that no action is not a strategy. You've got to come up with some sort of regulation. Fine, if you want to do this, and pursue that path. But wallet to wallet, you've got to let some things go. If people are doing a direct wallet to wallet transaction, we don't see why they have to have a data security or data recovery if they're doing a contemporaneous transaction, right? I go to Brian and we agree to sell Bitcoin to each other. It's a direct transaction. Happens in that moment, we both leave. One of us has crypto, one of us has cash or some other form of dirty fiat. The transaction is over. There's no promise. There's no promise to deliver at a later time, a later date, destination, nothing like that. We both leave. I don't understand why we would need to go through this process when states like Illinois and Texas, which are going to eat California's lunch if this bill goes forward, why that's going to happen. Because remember, this is in writing. We have regulatory guidance in writing from the IDFPR in Illinois, from the Texas Department of Banking, in writing, 6 pages, state of Texas, very straightforward. They're very straightforward in Texas. 6 pages. You want to do a direct wallet-to-wallet transaction? Not much state money transmitter license. So that's where I think you're going to see a lot more activity pick up. And this is bad news for business, in my opinion, in California. The other bill to keep an eye out for is AB. Ooh, that's not really a straight A there. All right. AB 953, which I'm coming on board too. I have to read a little bit more about, but essentially at its framework, AB 953, that would allow licensed, I emphasize licensed, cannabis companies in the state of Illinois to pay their taxes in a stablecoin. Cool. So yeah, pretty cool, huh? I like that, yeah. So if you are a licensed cannabis company, dispensary, seed to sale, anywhere in that process, you have a bunch of money, you can pay the state of California in your favorite stablecoin. This is a big deal for many reasons. It's a big deal, in my opinion, for public safety, right? So the cannabis dispensaries, I don't know if anyone's familiar with this industry or wants to admit it, but in the licensed cannabis industry, there is a lot of cash. And if you have boxes and boxes of cash, you have boxes and boxes of cash in the back room, the banks don't want to take it. What are you going to do with it? You have to bring it to the tax office. You have a bunch of cash. It sounds like a good problem to have, right? That's a public safety issue, right? And I didn't come up with that term. The former sheriff of King County in Seattle, that was his leading position on the cash problem. It's a public safety issue, and I agree. So this might go a long way to solve that, right? Whatever you think about stable coins or you want to debate crypto, what's a real crypto? At least it's the right idea, right? Hey, we can use crypto as a safe means to instantly send store value rather than have these sort of boxes full of greenbacks that may or may not make their way to the state. Let's have some transparency. So 2 key pieces of legislation. Again, I'm giving you my opinion. I know that there might be some different opinions in this room, but I'd love to get your feedback on that. And then one final note, because I really want to get to your questions, and I hope we still have some time. All of this, in terms of financial institutions and oversight of financial institutions, if your financial institution does not fit in a money transmitter box, securities box, or commodities box, for example, a crypto lender or a crypto hedge fund, all of this is under the umbrella of the Bank Secrecy Act, BSA. It defines the term financial institution, and they define it as a list of different types of businesses. And on that list, oddly enough, money transmitter, securities, commodities, and others, but they also have on that list loan or finance companies, which covers crypto lenders, and they have other business models as well. So even if you don't have to necessarily register or get a securities license or any of these, under the Bank Secrecy Act, if you're defined as a financial institution, you still have to have an AML program. At its core, the AML program is essentially the government deputizing financial institutions to report suspicious behavior.